Welcome back and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. I am Kenneth Shark Kinney, your host and Chief Shark Officer. One thing the pandemic has helped highlight, if you will, is how leaders are, leading. And that's demonstrated a new kind of leadership needed to deliver superior results as well as build community within a team. And that starts with a real look in the mirror and asking yourself, how can you expect others to trust and believe in you if you aren't truthful, if you aren't authentic, and if you don't embrace your whole self at work? Welcoming back to the show, Mentor Dial, who's a storyteller, filmmaker, professional speaker, and author of several best-selling books, including his newest, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. And on this episode, we'll discuss leadership in a pandemic, trust, authenticity, purpose washing to purpose tyranny, looking at leadership from large to small businesses, showing my tattoos in the boardroom, the Grateful Dead, paddle tennis, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a You leader as he sits down for a third time with a leader of sharks on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Mentor, thank you so much for joining us again today on A Shark's Perspective. I'm honored to have you back on the show. You're the first three-peater, and I know it took us 3 or 4 times with an ice storm, my dead heater, and everything else to get you back on the show, but welcome back.
Hey, life's a journey. Thanks for having me on. It's great pleasure to be a first-time three-peater. I actually think that's the first time I've three-peated anywhere, so.
Well, we'll talk about a four-peater next time. So let's dive into your new book, You Lead. It's a fantastic read. You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. What inspired you to write this book at this time?
All right. So the funny thing is, it's just yet another leadership book, and my wife said, "Why are you bothering doing that? There's so many out there." Well, the fundamental thought is actually, if leadership was fixed, then we wouldn't have this huge amount of disaffection, disengagement at the employee level. And there are a lot of things that I thought about before the pandemic, but it turns out that I really feel that this pandemic has sort of opened up the kimono on a whole lot of other issues which are riding underneath it and have made it even more relevant. This notion of being yourself at work and how that turns you into a better leader.
I have long said this, but leadership had to pivot like everything else, because for the first time, they didn't learn to trust their employees like you would. You were forced to learn because of the pandemic. And there weren't a lot of books. There wasn't a lot of subject matter expertise. How to manage a remote workforce is one thing. How to lead them through a pandemic is another. So define, if you will, what it is that you're trying to address for those kind of leaders. What do you want them to learn from this book so that they can help lead through that?
Yeah. So the first thing is recognition that leadership is messy.
Yeah.
It's messy because it's really all about relationships. And when you mentioned the idea of trust, writing a book on how to be trustworthy, it's like trying to write a book on how to be authentic.
Right.
And the key issue and the key concept, which I really lean into within the book, is how do you actually find out who you are? Because until you've done that hard work, not just an intellectual exercise, not just sort of, I know myself, but lean in, understand your imperfections, your dark side, your full self, then you start having presence, and that'll help you in your relationship and building a better trustworthy set.
A lot of times when I read leadership books, it's often Fortune 500 size companies, but really help define where you look at it from, whether or not it's just a small company or a giant company with tens or hundreds of thousands of employees. And I think that's often a mistake that a lot of authors take, is they only look at it as some major global brand when a great majority of businesses around the world are small businesses.
Yeah, the vast majority are small businesses. And what I try to do, lay out in chapter 2, which is really all about governance, is to explain how that's different and where that has an impact. And of course, if you're like a solopreneur is one thing.
Sure.
You're an entrepreneur that has your own team that you started at, you have 20 people in your team. That's another thing. And then you are Bezos running your company. Well, of course, he's about to leave, but you've made your big company. You're running that. That's another thing. And then you're the CEO who's just been, say, transplanted, put into the position. You get shareholder, get some options and so on. But that's a whole nother gig. And each of these massively changes the way you can be yourself in terms of the governance and your flexibility and options.
So, how are leaders pretending to be who they're not?
Well, I think sometimes it's really just overly dependent on their ego. That's probably the biggest component. Second thing, I think we've basically been trained to be more performance oriented, get the money in, and gosh, of course, you do need to do that. But it's been so overtrained, Taylorism, huge amount of productivity, get the business in. What happens at home stays at home. And, all we're here to do is get the business in, please the shareholder. And essentially that kind of attitude, legacy attitude, still reigns today because, well, first of all, Wall Street still prefers only to pay if you perform. And all the business schools are run by professors who've actually never run a business.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still seem to be promoting a lot of theoretical stuff, and you get all these things like productivity, make my first million. Well, is that really what's important? And we lose very quickly touch, I believe, of what's important.
So, help define then how leaders let their hair down, if you will, to expose who they really are. I mean, I don't think it's me walking through the boardroom showing all my tattoos, but what does that look like to you, and how do you describe that in the book?
Well, I'd love to get back to the tattoo comment in
Yeah.
a moment, but in general, the issue is that, of course, we have a full spectrum. We are, let's say, 100%. But nobody really has full knowledge of the 100% of us. So we already have to believe that we don't know ourselves and will never fully understand ourselves. And then if I like to do is break down who we are into three pieces. One is the performing piece, the professional, the know what a P&L is, know what the right type of marketing messages could be. That's great. The second one is private, intimate. And that needs to stay off the radar. That is your private garden, and that's a secret garden that you deserve to have and should have, must have. I like to say there's beauty in mystery. And then there's this third piece, and this is where it comes down, is the personal side. So what does personal mean? Well, it means things like your sense of humor, what you read on your spare time, maybe things about your family or not. Anyway, this area, which can, of course, merge into the intimate, is your personal side. And if we spend all our time just focused on the professional driving the business and we don't err into our personal side because we're afraid of revealing anything from our private side, then we're putting up guards. And as soon as you're putting up guards like that, how can you be considered trustworthy or authentic?
So many leaders are jumping in with now a purpose, whether they have a company that they started up or one that they took over, but they really embrace a lot of this leadership, if you will, by taking on some sort of cause. How do you look at that? How did you talk about that in the book?
Well, let's say I talk about it a lot in the book, and
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
there is a huge need to have
That
purpose.
was a little bit of a
But
hint.
exactly. Yet, the reality is that there's a lot of purpose washing.
Hmm.
There's a lot of superficiality to the way we go about it. And then there's purpose tyranny. So you have to find the right balance. And really what I like to suggest is you figure out what is that purpose, a purpose that has to be both personal and professional and has to be somewhat realistic. Of course, if you have the wherewithal and you wish to fix humanity, then go for it. But I'm much more in favor of looking at a purpose that is within some kind of reach, that becomes a beacon, a lighthouse for everything you're doing. And of course, it's a continuing journey. It's unlikely you're ever going to solve that purpose fully, but that's what you're made for. That's who you want to be, as opposed to what you want to do. And so there are three levels of purpose, really. There's the purpose where you put it down and it's more or less, like a charity you're going to support. On the one hand, you're going to do something that's ethically questionable, but you're happy to give away 2% to this charity to say, look at me. And various versions of that. I was a more cynical one, but there are many versions of that. The second one is you might have something that really is interesting. You're doing something purposeful, but it doesn't actually resonate within you and your team. And the third one is when you are feeling very aligned at a personal level, such that, for example, you'll have your kids involved, such that you will be happy to think about it over the weekend on your walk with your dogs. And you jump out of bed, let's say on Monday morning. God knows we're not on any 9 to 5 schedule these days, but with that sort of zest that says, this is who I am. This is what I am. It's part of my integral self. And then that's a real purpose. Again, it doesn't have to be fixing the world, but it's something bigger than just for me. And that's really what it's about.
Agree. So I like how you devoted several of the early chapters as well to employees. And it made me think in particular about leadership with a cause, because so often as an employee, if you're at a large company and a leader takes over every 2.5 years, whatever that cause is can change. And then the new leader comes in and he's trying to lead them to adopt that cause. And it becomes just a constant shuffling of papers. And it's unfortunate, but it really deters people from embracing a lot of those causes sometimes. And then it becomes a challenge just to motivate and engage employees.
100%. I mean, well, I mean, obviously not, we're not duped anymore by
Exactly.
just giving to charities. But the issue, as you say, is it something that's deeper? And when people go on board, they should be kind of monitored for that, or gauging just to what extent it talks into them. When like what I was saying at the very beginning with the governance, you take over a company, you can't just impose the purpose. You might want to, or we had to have more purpose, but that's a whole process, and it's a much messier, bigger deal. And we need to stop thinking about it on a tyrannical level where it's like the thing, it's the only thing. No, you still need to be profitable. You
Mhm.
still have a context. You still got to deal with who you are as you are. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of eye rolling. And
Mhm.
one of the biggest things that I learned in my time, Kenneth, when I was working at L'Oreal, was when I had the opportunity to work on one specific brand. And as opposed to working on a number of brands, what I was able to do was go deep on one brand. And the thing I fundamentally learned, was the power of having that purpose resonate from within at the core with your employees, including yourself as the boss, through the value chain. And if you can because let me give you an example. Amazon, pretty cool company, does lots of things, pretty useful during the pandemic, made a few people rich, fine. I think its purpose is completely barmy and cannot last. And the reason is this: its purpose is to be the single most customer centric organization on this earth. That's fine. That's lovely. Great for customers. But first of all, it does shit for people who are like booksellers, like me. But more importantly, how does that make employees feel better about themselves? How does it make them better? How does it resonate with them? Do they wake up every morning thinking, all I've got to do is serve billions of customers? And that's,
Exactly.
wait, every customer is the same value? How does it make your life as an individual living in your detached home, wherever you are, or semi-detached, or your flat? And by the way, why we've seen so much employee dissatisfaction at Amazon is I think that they don't take care inside out.
So you mentioned earlier, speaking about customers, how do you think that this helps improve really the customer experience that so many people are trying to address now? How do leaders take your book and apply that to really serving customers better?
So it's a great point, Kenneth, because in the end of the day, so many of us have now gotten tuned into this idea that the customer is important. You've got
Finally. Yeah.
podcasts and books all writing about customer experience. The customer is king and queen, whatever, and certainly the customer is important. And we moved away from just let's have profits. You need profits, to actually the customer pays us, and that's how we're going to get profits. But the new world really, and this is basically new to the last 20 years, is that there are so many more people involved in that customer experience within your organization and amongst the stakeholders, that you need to have that purpose resonate throughout your entire organization. just from a customer touch point standpoint, you've got social media, customer service, sales, marketing, all these different people that may or may not report into the same person talking to customers. And if they aren't all geared up in the same way, well, you're going to get a really dysfunctional customer experience. So the key is, since you have all these employee touch points or stakeholders, how are you motivating them? How are you tapping into their discretionary energy such that they are so prepared to deliver a seamless experience to customers? And the key there is by having a unifying and bigger purpose. Once that's drilled in and pushed down through the organization and all the employees feel it, then they get over the, well, my domain, my ego, and they're at the service of this bigger idea, which is making the world a better place somehow and serving my customers through it. And that's the real chain. You never can lose sight of profitability. That's always got to be important. Must be pragmatic, not tyrannical, but that's the journey that companies need to be on.
So I'm going to borrow the title from a chapter. I would encourage everybody to read the book, but in particular, borrow chapter 9, Connecting the Dots. What's the pathway you give leaders to really start addressing this and connecting the dots so that they can exhibit better leadership?
Well, lots of things within there. I'd say the first one is within the consciousness and self-awareness to know that you can't and don't know everything. So the very first thing is position yourself as a humble servant that needs to learn every day, all day. And you can learn in the weirdest of places, unexpectedly, and allow for those moments to happen. Key thing, one of the big characteristics I think of the leaders of tomorrow are the ones who are curious, who are not going to throw out the playbook that got them to where they are, but are certainly prepared to challenge any of the principles that they have that have made them the success that they've got there. That's fine. But we need to open up, and which means that we have to have the humility to say, hey, listen, Kenneth, you know more about this than I do. Help me understand. And so connecting dots means being open to the signs, being open to other people that might be actually smarter, better than you are, and allow for that to happen, and be the connector between those people and those ideas.
Connector in chief. So, mentor, what do you do for fun?
So I have a regime, and I've been trying to apply it with great discipline throughout this whole pandemic locked down situation that we've had, certainly in London. And so I love music. I've been to over 800 concerts in my life. So
Wow.
that's not been easy to do currently, but
In
I play
any
guitar.
particular group?
Oh, yes, sir. Of course, I saw one band a couple hundred times. That would be an old hippie band. I'm an old guy, and I like the Grateful Dead quite a lot. I have something like, I don't know, 100 days solid on my hard disk of bootlegs. So I have no end of good music I can listen to. Notice that's not streaming, by the way. That's still resident on my hard disk. But
You need to go
so
with David Meerman Scott.
indeed. Well, David and I are fast friends, and we've talked about this a lot. Hats off to his book, the Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead. So music, I play 30 minutes a day. I love exercise, getting my ODs out, and one of my great areas and passions is a sport that's not familiar in the United States, although there are some courts in Miami. And before I say the word, it's not the same that you're thinking of. It's called paddle tennis,
Mm-hmm.
PADEL tennis,
Mm-hmm.
which is really popular in Mexico, Argentina, and Spain, and Sweden, actually. And it's a sort of a mini tennis, but with a whole lot of different rules, with walls, makes it look like squash. And you can play as a 3-year-old, get the ball over the net, and you can play as an 80-year-old and still feel competitive. And that is a game, as a 56-year-old, I am hugely enjoying. So that's and the last thing I say is every day I plan to have a green meeting, and that gives me energy. And my green meeting, so I'm kind of almost probably anal about this, but I want to make sure I meet somebody new every day, even locked down. And so every day I try to meet somebody new and discover them, open myself up to their experience, hear their story, and connect. Because I think connection is one way to gain energy.
Which is perfect for our earlier conversation about Clubhouse. So at least gives you that opportunity. Well, Mentor, I don't think I've asked you this before. I went back and listened to our previous shows, but you're on a shark's perspective for the third time. What is your favorite kind of shark and why?
Hmm. Well, I know my favorite type of whale, which is the humpback. And the reason why I love them is their ability to fish as a group. And it's an extraordinary choreography that the way they do fishing. I love that. So from a shark perspective, I would probably have to say the tiger shark
Okay.
is the one that looks the most sleek. The marcations make it easy to recognize. I think the shape, the size, the power of the tiger shark. That's what I think. Of course, I'm not really knowledgeable. I've never had to go and I've never caressed a tiger shark, probably like you have.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a good choice of words. It's something I do frequently. I see tiger sharks in the northeast of Florida, and trying to schedule another trip to go swim with them. So, well, Mentor, it's a special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
Yes, sir.
All right, another first for us, I think. Number 1. So, World Cup question, because you get triple citizenship. We'll ask this one at least. England or France? Who you pulling for?
England.
England. All right. Number 2, Benny Hill or Mr. Bean?
Mr. Bean,
Really? Benny Hill
by
was
a long
pretty
way.
funny. Yeah.
Oh yes, but we could talk about how the comedy is different, right?
Very.
It's anyway. So
Yeah.
definitely Mr. Bean.
All right. Number 3, talk a little bit about music. Adele or Dua Lipa?
Adele.
Number 4, hosting a podcast on your own or being a podcast guest with the same frequency of shows where you're talking to people? Because you also host a podcast.
I like hosting podcasts. I feel like I meet people as I podcast. And that gives me energy. When I'm the guest, I have to be really focused. I mean, of course I'm focused anyway, but I really want to serve you and your audience as opposed to me and my audience.
Yeah. Yeah. Number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today, we're talking American food, biscuits or cornbread. And you were born
Cornbread.
here, so you have to be able to answer this.
So I was born in Belgium,
Oh, I thought you were born in
but
the US.
no. I was born in Belgium, and but I moved to America when I was 18, and so
So you have citizenship in 4 countries?
no, so I only have citizenship in France and the United States.
Okay.
So which puts
But you're
the
living in
answer.
England
I live
part
in
of the time.
England. I went to
Okay.
school here for 12 years
Okay.
in England. I played rugger as a child. I played 18 years of
Yeah.
rugby, and cricket. And so I have a whole Englishness to me, which is how I ended up supporting the English rugby team as opposed to the French rugby team, much to my wife's dismay.
All right. So you're going with cornbread. Mentor, where do people find out more about you, get a copy of this book, listen to your podcast, get in touch with you and more?
So I have this silly name, Minter Dial. Benefit is that there isn't anybody else apparently with that name. So .com, I have it easily. I'm MDial on many of my social, Twitter, Instagram, MDIAL. And otherwise, my podcast is called Minter Dialogue. And it's a weekly. And otherwise, my books and such are available on all fine e-tailers. And a little plug for bookshop.org, selling or helping independent bookshops to
Amen.
sell, but also on the Big A from Seattle that I mentioned earlier, and others as well. So anyone have any gets my book and sends me a photograph with the book, I always like to tag them and put them up on my social.
Fantastic. Mentor, thank you again for joining us on A Shark's Perspective.
Been my great pleasure, Kenneth. Thank you.
So there was my conversation with Mentor Dial, a storyteller, filmmaker, professional speaker, and author of several best-selling books, including his newest, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, leadership is messy because it's all about relationships. And until you've leaned in, done the work, taken that tough look in the mirror, then you can't make that authentic self stand out. Love that point. Second, so many leadership discussions too often, in my opinion, put too much of a spotlight on those largest businesses. It's great to see what Amazon, Starbucks, and GM, for example, have done. Well done, but so many small businesses face just as tough problems without as much rope to cling to on that side of the cliff. I like at least that in the book, there's a practical way to look in the mirror for a business of any size, for a leader of any size. Be who you are, whatever size company it is. Don't fall into the trap of being a leader, pretending to be who they're not. Third, really love the point on purpose and cause. So many companies are actively seeking and adopting purposes and causes. But Mentor reminds us to make sure that the purpose is within reach and it's a continuing journey. Leaders have to make sure that it's not just part of their own DNA, something that makes them excited, but part of their company's DNA. If it isn't, then at least know, as Mentor said, with consumers, we're not duped anymore into just giving to charities. And consumers know that for many companies, it's a brand ploy and that it's not part of their DNA. And for others that support it because of who they are and that they genuinely care, it's a real advantage. Leaders come and go. Ask yourself if the purpose or cause you believe in or support is something that's going to last after you're gone. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. I'm so thankful for every listener. It's time for you to lead. It's time for me to jump in the water and do the same. So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.